This reusable gift bag could work for a small birthday or Christmas present, or sew them in bulk for party favors at a wedding, since you can easily simplify the process and make them even faster. You'll need a piece of fabric that's 20 by 28 centimeters and a piece for the strip, and that's 5 by 46 centimeters. Of course, you could skip this step if you have ribbons. First, we're going to fold and press the strip in half. This will create a crease in the fabric that we can use as a guideline once we press in the sides. Once you start folding in the sides toward that centered crease, you don't really have to measure, but you do want to be consistent with how wide you fold it. I'm folding it at about 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. Once you've done one side, move over to the other side, and you want to make sure you leave a little gap in the center, because if you overlap them in the center, it's going to create bulk. Try to align the edges as best you can, because this will save you time once you're sewing. After pressing, fold the strip in half and mark the center point. Then move that pin about 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch away from the center point. When you're sewing, you're going to do a back stitch just before and after that pin. Now we're going to sew as close to the edge as we can. And what I like to do is align the folded edges with the gap of my presser foot and then slightly offset the needle position to the left of that. And then don't look at the needle, just look at how you're feeding the strip and align it to the gap in the presser foot. Where the pin was is where I'm going to cut the strip later on. So we're going to do a back stitch, sew past where the pin was and do another back stitch. And this way the strap shouldn't unravel once you cut it. Now to attach the strap to the bag, take the fabric for the bag and fold it with the right side of the fabric facing you. So the right side of the fabric is on the outside. Place the strap on the fabric and align the raw edges with the edge of the bag. Place them about 4.5 centimeters from the top of the bag. Instead of pinning the actual straps, I've put a pin at that 4.5 centimeter mark, and then I will just hold the straps once I feed them through the sewing machine. But please do use pins or clips to keep the straps in place if that's easier for you. Since we're going to do a French seam, I'm going to sew at about 5 millimeters from the raw edges, which is a scant 1/4 inch. Once I reach the straps, I will just remove the pin and hold the straps as I feed them under the presser foot. Because we're doing a French seam, I'm going to use a rotary cutter to trim off all the fraying edges, because otherwise they will be poking out of the seam on the right side of the bag. Next, we're going to fold the bag inside out so we can press the seam. And to make sure it's folded exactly on the stitch line, it can help to roll the seam between your fingers before you press it. And please don't skip these steps, because for a French seam to look good, these steps are really worth it. For the second line of stitches that will encase all the raw edges and the strap, we're going to sew on the wrong side of the bag. And we're going to sew at about 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch, which is actually quite wide for this French seam, but it will give you some room for error. At the start of the seam, you saw me using some scrap fabric. It's also known as a thread bunny, and it helps you prevent those long thread tails at the start of the seam. But I find it also helps prevent your sewing machine from eating your project at the start or end of a seam when you're backstitching. Give your seam a quick finger press or press with an iron and mark the center of the bag. And align that crease with the French seam. This is all to get your bag ready for the second French seam that we're going to do to close the bottom of the bag. And remember that the right side of the fabric has to be on the outside while you stitch the first line of stitches close to the edge. So 5 millimeters or a scant 1/4 inch from the raw edge. And you know the drill, trim any fraying threads before you turn the bag and press the seam. And also make sure you poke out the corners. I'm using my bamboo point turner, but anything pointy will do. Now sew at about 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch from the edge of the bag. Now to be able to finish off the top of the bag, we're going to make a little snip in the French seam. And you can snip right up to the stitch line, even further than I actually did. Snip at about 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch from the top of the bag, because this is how wide our first fold will be. And before we fold over the raw edge, fold that little flap of French seam to the side. That way, once everything is folded over, you won't have 3 layers of French seam to sew over, but 2. And you can check if you're folding the edge over at 1 centimeter, but the key here is to be consistent. So you don't really have to measure, but you do have to be consistent. For the second fold, we're gonna fold at about 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch. But you don't have to measure. You can align the top of the bag to the top of the straps, and you can feel them through the bag. But if you can't feel them, just use a pin to mark them. After folding and pressing the top of the bag, you're ready to sew all around it. But since this bag is quite small and it doesn't fit over the free arm of my sewing machine, what I like to do is turn it right side out, but still sew on the inside of the bag. To get nice even stitch line, I tend to align the folded edge to the gap in my presser foot and slightly offset the needle. And then I focus just on the area right in front of the presser foot, keeping the project nice and flat. That way I can evenly feed it through the machine. And as you're seeing, I'm not going super fast. I keep sewing a little bit, readjust, sew a little bit and readjust. And I keep repeating that all the way around. As I'm sewing in a circle, I didn't backstitch at the start, but at the end I'm going to do a backstitch over those first few stitches. The final step is to cut the straps. And even though I did the backstitching, I'm double checking to see if one of the straps is 19 centimeters, which is about 7.5 inches. Because what's the saying, measure twice, cut once? Well, just to be safe. Now to tie the bow, take the long strip and go over and under the short strip. Then pull and slightly readjust the top of the bag. Then make and hold a loop with the short side. Then take the long strap and go around and under. You might not always get an even bow, but you can always trim one of the longer sides or readjust to get a good result. If you would like to make this bag even faster, you can buy ribbon and trim the top with pinking shears instead of doing a double fold hem. And if you've used store-bought ribbon, I have a little trick to get those nice ends. Fold the ribbon in half and cut upwards from edge to fold. I have more tutorials for easy to sew gift bags, which I'll put on screen.